Hello, everybody. Welcome to another SETA panel. This week, we know that the 77th General Assembly meeting of the United Nations is being held in New York, the United States. So as SETA, we have made some preparations for this year. We have published a series of analysis perspectives about the United Nations systems and about the current effectiveness of the United Nations. And today we have 4 distinguished speakers who will make their presentations, making presentations about the UN reform specifically, reflecting different perspectives from different parts of the world. Let me first introduce our speakers, then I will give the floor to our presenters. Our first speaker will be Ariel Gonzalez Levaggi. He is a professor in Pontifical Catholic University of Argentina. Our second speaker is Dr. Elsadig Elfaqih. He is a professor at Sakarya University in Turkey. Our third speaker is Dr. Nazmul. He is a professor of Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University based in Ankara, Turkey. And our last speaker is Dr. Yücel Acer, who is also a professor of international law from Ankara Yıldırım Beyazıt University, at the same time, who is a senior researcher at SETA Foundation. So now I want to give the first floor to Dr. Ariel Gonzalez Levaggi. He will make a presentation reflecting on Latin American and Caribbean perspectives of the UN reform. The floor is yours, Doctor.
Thank you, Muhittin Ataman, and all the SETA team for the invitation. I am very pleased to introduce some aspects of the Latin American and the Caribbean perspective on UN reform. Right now, we are in the midst of the great crisis since the World War II, when the Russian-Ukrainian war is happening. And as Gramsci says, the crisis consists presently in the fact that the old dies and the new cannot be born. And in that context, the role of multilateralism and the relevance of the United Nations is critical, and is long debated that the United Nations in general, but especially the United Nations Security Councils, needs to tackle a comprehensive reform. And in that regard, Latin American countries has their own voices, their own traditions, and their own contributions to reform, to improve the multilateral environment. And I would like to underline 2 special things. First, that Latin America in general, and especially like the biggest countries in the region, has usually developed a kind of tradition to enforce, to improve, and to solve armed conflicts, and based on the peaceful resolution of means. And this is something that is not new. So before the creation of the United Nations, Latin American diplomats like Carlos Saavedra Lamas, the first Latin American Nobel Prize Peace Nobel Prize. The Drago and other very important jurists promote different initiatives, different norms to avoid a kind of an asymmetric impact in the international affairs. But it will be after the creation of the United Nations where the Latin American countries really contribute in a broader sense to the new multilateral institution. And there is kind of a relative issue that is very relational issue that is very important. When the United Nations was created in 1945, the Latin American bloc was the biggest one in the overall United Nations General Assembly. So the relative weight of the region was very, very relevant. So from the early moment, the Latin American and Caribbean countries disagree with the landing to the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council the veto power. And actually, there is a critical discourse of one of the representatives of the Argentine delegation during the discussions in 1945, in which he defines the veto not only as a privilege, but also an absurdity, in which the nations, they should meet and resolve matter of interest, but it's important to underline that no one should have this privilege to decide over other countries. So on one side, we have a long tradition of criticism related to the veto power in United Nations. But at the same time, there has been a series of we call more empirical proposals and contributions of the region in both areas. First, to international security, and in that sense, the region generally promote peaceful resolution of conflicts, from the support for the peace, so the settlement of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and support the creation of the Palestinian state, to the repeat calls to end the Syrian civil war or the general condemnation of the regime of the Russian military actions in Ukraine. But we should have in mind that from an interstate perspective, Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone of peace. And actually, recently at the community of states of the Latin America and the Caribbean, one of the regional multilateral organizations, and nowadays I think is the most relevant to guess what the region is focused on. These multilateral organizations agree a declaration that reflects the idea that Latin America is a zone of peace. This is not only a kind of narrative. The last we can go small armed conflict that the region suffered was in the early 90s between Ecuador and Peru. But if we need to go behind to see a bigger conflict, we are reaching almost a century in the famous, unfamous war between Bolivia and Paraguay, the Chacos War, that ended in 1935. So this contribution is not only normative, but also is an example of the interaction, peaceful interactions among regional actors in Latin America that at the same time has been reinforced with regionalism initiatives like Mercosur, like SELAC, like others more non-binding institutions in which the regions propose something different. And on the other hand, especially in the 2000s decade, the region has been very active, not only to propose the peaceful resolution of conflicts and related kind of norms, but also contributing to peacekeeping operations, especially in that period, had we can say the peak of the participation of the region to almost 10% of all the UN nations effectives to the overall peacekeeping operations. But on the other hand, the region decided to lead a United Nations stabilization mission in Haiti, the MINUSTA, between 2004 and 2017, in which Argentina, Brazil, and Chile play a critical role. So at the same time, we need to take into account that Latin America and the Caribbean is a zone free of nuclear weapons. And the countries decides to withdraw its own aspirations to have a nuclear device, to develop nuclear technology with military applications, to develop a region or to enforce this region of peace. And nowadays, the director general of the International Atomic Energy Agency is an Argentinian, Rafael Grossi, and is playing a very constructive role in trying to avoid a nuclear catastrophe in the Russian-Ukrainian war. In addition to the contributions to the international security, Latin America and the Caribbean nations have always have, we can say that, a common goal. It's the goal of development. So the focus of the agenda is not on security matters, but on economic and developmental issues. And this is why the ideas of the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean and the agenda developed at the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development, in addition to the push for South-South cooperation, is part of a very important triangle in the development of a Latin American perspective on how the South, how the developing countries have to strengthen its cooperation, develop a more symmetrical, a more horizontal approach towards global development, and also became recognized by the developed countries to their own aspirations to reach the best options for the development of its own citizens. So nowadays, the Latin America agenda on this issue is focused on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, in which the main focus is the reduction of inequality and the eradication of extreme poverty. But I won't. I would like to take too much time for this presentation. But this is something that I would like to underline. That is the different approaches in Latin America about the United Nations security reform. And the main divide in Latin America, and this is something that's continued until now, is on the one side the aspiration of Brazil to have a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council, and on the other hand, a different perspective that is especially supported by Argentina and Mexico, grounded in the coffee group and then in United for Consensus, in which they aspires to the creation of a rotation for the entry of non-permanent members, and oppose frontally the creation of new permanent members at the Nations Security Council. So, and this is why the Latin American nations agree on reform, but at the same time, they not agree they are not everyone on the same page. And this is something that came from the early 90s and continues until today. Thank you.
Levaggi, it was a concise presentation. Especially the last point was quite significant. I just forgot to mention that four speakers, all of speakers, in one sense, represent certain regions which are unfortunately largely underrepresented by the United Nations, at the United Nations. You know, Latin America and the Caribbean subcontinent or region is not represented, as Dr. Ariel Gonzalez just mentioned. There is no permanent members from Latin America. There is no permanent member representing the African continent, you know, which represents more than 50 countries, which hosts more than 50 countries. And also similarly, South Asia or Southeast Asia is also it's not represented at the UN Security Council. Sorry. And Turkey also, if you wish, representing either the Muslim world or the Middle East or the Turkic world. So none of these regions or civilizations or ethnicities are represented at the UN Security Council. So it is quite significant. One further point, please ask your questions in the comment sections of YouTube and Facebook. You can join us through these platforms. Now I want to give the floor to Dr. Elsadig Elfaqih, who will make a presentation reflecting on the African perspective of the UN reform. The floor is yours, Dr. Elfaqih.
Thank you so much, Shep, and truly appreciated the chance to be with you and to participate and to try to reflect some of the perceptions of the Africans or the African continent in regards to the United Nations. The Africans, when they look to the United Nations, they have this idea of that countries are not created equals, because the peculiarity of the relations between the African continent and the United Nations, as you know, in the history of the organizations, African countries were almost all under colonial systems, and the colonial countries are the one who are presiding over the decision making of the United Nations and newly created United Nations. So African countries, almost all of them, came of late in joining the United Nations. This is why the relations were never really rectified or corrected until today. Many countries feel that they are underrepresented as countries and also as the continent. Yes, the United Nations, in order to be relevant, it has to undergo real reform. The reform has been tried many times, but it boiled out in just recreated the United Nations itself in terms of positions, in terms of the employment, in terms of employees shifted from here and there, but not real representations of the countries, member countries of the United Nations. As it has been said, Africa has more than 50 countries, which constitute almost a quarter of the membership of the United Nations, and is still not represented. Not only that, the relationship also, it has many mishaps between the African countries and the United Nations in terms of its shares in economic development, its shares in peace control, peace keeping, peace building, not only in other countries, but in the continent itself. As I was talking to one of the major leaders of the Africa Union Council or Commission on Peace and Security, he was telling me that it was very difficult dealing with the United Nations when it comes to peacekeeping missions, even within the African continent. They don't give leadership to the Africans who knows better the situation, who knows better the environment, who knows better the complexities of the African conflicts and African struggle at certain points. And the case in point, which was very telling, how the United Nations is dealing with cases in Africa. If you go look at Libya, for example, United Nations Security Council acknowledged the Parliament of Tobruk as a legitimate representative of the Libyan people. At the same time, went and recognized the government in Tripoli, while two members, major members of the Big Five, Russia and France, were acquiescing and dealing with the rebel leader in the east, despite the fact that they are the one who took the decision to acknowledge the parliament, which is not in good terms or which is not reconciled itself with the government of Tripoli, which is also recognized by the United Nations. So this paradoxical kind of relationship with African issues are very well taken into account by the Africans when they look to the United Nations, and there are so many examples of these paradoxical relationship or interventions sometimes in African and different African issues. You find conflicting signals coming out of the United Nations, conflicting signals coming out of the Security Council when it comes to African issues. The relationship with the Africa Union also, there were a lot of criticism. I was permanent representative at the Africa Union for quite some time. At the ECA, the Economic Council for Africa, which is a UN institutions, yes, it is trying to help, it is trying to lend technical assistance to many African countries, but they all see that is not enough. This is why MENA region, which is North Africa, which is part of the continent, resorted and joined another economic institution, which is ESCOA, and the council, which is meant for West Asia, now include all African countries in the north, from Morocco all the way down to Sudan. They are all members, with the exception of Algeria. They are members of West Asia Economic Council rather than the Economic Council for Africa, which is meant for the whole continent, including the Arab region in the north. So there is a lot of criticism around so many issues, not to mention or not to forget the migration, the irregular migrations, and the horrible incidents that is always in the media from those about those who are crossing the Mediterranean to go to Europe or roaming the continent, trying to find a way to migrate to the west or to other countries because of the economic deprivation within the continent itself. So the United Nations is trying. It has a presence. It is trying to do something in the continent, but all Africans see that is not enough. And also they see the manifestation of imperial psychology from big members of the United Nations itself. There is a lot of interventions, a lot of presence, sometimes hard power presence, like in North Africa, Sahel countries. There is a lot of presence which are not welcomed by the locals, by the governments of the region, but still there is remnants of the colonial era within Africa, which is not condemned. It is rather condoned by the United Nations and protested by the locals of those countries. Find French troops in many countries. You find intervening powers, Western powers in many parts of Africa, and it is not really condemned, rather condoned by the United Nations. So there is a lot of issues that Africans look at it seriously as problematic rather than helping to solve the real problems of Africa. There are some institutions within the United Nations system also are very unuseful, to say the least. The International Monetary Fund is always imposing austerity measures within African countries or in African countries, always asking for reform, but reform as part of a package of austerity measures, which is not welcome in all African countries, this kind of intervention. To mention the ICC and how it is referred to by the Security Council, and the Africans saw it as a European court which is trying to demean them rather than helping them create justice in their different lands in the continent, targeting African leaders, targeting African individuals, and not and the strange thing about the ICC, the permanent members of the United Nations who made the referral of Libya and the Sudan to the ICC, some of them are not members of the ICC itself. Not only that, a country like the United States is exempting itself from any kind of jurisdictions of the International Criminal Court. And not only that, it is soldiers who are intervening in many countries in bloody wars, are also exempted from any jurisdictions of the International Court, while the Security Council of the United Nations is referring countries, making political decisions to legal institutions like the International Criminal Court. The most sticky point, which has been the call of Africans for a long time, and it has been mentioned also in regards to Latin America and the Caribbeans and Southeast Asia, Arab countries, Muslim countries, and Turk countries, the representation in the United Nations. Yes, presidents, prime ministers are going now to the 77 of the General Assembly meeting. But when we look at the General Assembly meeting and the decisions taken by the General Assembly meetings and the voting of the Assembly meetings, it is more than a debating society rather than a real political force. The big force of the United Nations is the Security Council, which is not representing us all. All the Africans have been talking for a long time about their rightful share to be represented at the Security Council, as also as many continents also are trying their best to include themselves as equal partners in the Security Council. As recent as the beginning of this month, the TCAT, which is an organization including Japan and the African countries, the Japanese president called for an inclusion or a representation of Africa in the Security Council. So the call for representation for Africa is not coming only from African countries, from African institutions, regional institutions, but also start coming from different countries, which they see it is unfair for a continent which represented a quarter of the membership of the United Nations not to be represented equally or fully at the Security Council. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Elfaqih. It was a very in-depth analysis, both from academic and diplomatic perspective. Thank you very much. And now I want to give the floor to Dr. Nazmul Islam, who will make a presentation about the Asian perspective of the United Nations reform. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Professor Ataman. That's really great to be here and to talk about very important issues, because we are now talking about the issues when we are seeing after really, I mean, like 3 years later, now United Nations General Assembly, especially the 77th General Assembly, is ongoing. And during this time to talk about the reforms and also the role of UN in different regions and also different perspectives, indeed a very good crucial program, I can say. So yes, it's very clear, like the way and the area what I'm going to talk is about the role of UN in Asia, and try to see the Asian perspective and to add something like how Asia want to see the reform in UN system. So to jump to the reform and the role of UN, the area of the Asia we have to understand. So the fact is here, I mean, when we are talking about the United Nations, so what they are focusing in Asia, it's very simple. Like even also when like recently I'm looking at the contents of the UN, what they did, especially in the last, let's say like for 5 years. So most of the contents is very clear. They are focused the two important issues. The one is Afghanistan crisis, and the second is the Rohingya refugee crisis. So these two are the most, I mean, security and humanitarian concerned issues for United Nations. And that's why UN itself and their organs like UNDP, UNHCR, or whoever, I mean, like we're working with UN, they are focusing these two countries. Of course, there are other conflicting zones or other conflicting problems or security problems, let's say like the in Mindanao, like Moro people, and also the problem and conflict with the Philippine government, and also the problem in a Patani Muslim in Thailand. And also there was some sort of problem in Cambodia, and also like China-centric problem in Turkmenistan or some other places, let's say South China Sea. So these are the like some statement-based works or role that UN are playing, apart from the, as I said, like the Afghanistan and in Myanmar and Bangladesh, the Rohingya refugee crisis. And of course, there are also other issues that I missed, like the Kashmir issue between the China and between the Pakistan and India. So these are the basically we can look the what UN trying to focus and what actually been the security concerns that we have seen in the Asian or in the region of Asia. So let's come to the point, like what kind of role United Nations is trying to do. The first thing when we are taking the case like Afghanistan security crisis or humanitarian crisis, it's very clear the United Nations, they are making their role either very limited or they are just working for very focused issues. So let's come to the point, like which are that issues. For example, in the case of Afghanistan, United Nations, they basically been, it's been in the era of the second Taliban regime. It's very clear that UN just want to work for the humanitarian assistance or humanitarian issues. So let's come to the questions again, like why UN do not want to go apart from the humanitarian aid or humanitarian perspectives, because it's very difficult. We will also come up like in our concluding part. It's very clear because UN do not want to go apart from the humanitarian assistance. Yeah, when we take this only one variable or factor like the UN role in humanitarian assistance, it's very huge. For example, of course, like in my analysis, it will be more details like the way UN is trying to work in there. Even also, during or from 2001 to now, even within these 20 years, UN has diverse works for Afghanistan and Afghan people. But as I said, it's basically, the basement is humanitarian assistance. And by looking that assistance, the two most important organs of UN, like UNDP and UNHCR, they are basically work for the people of the Afghanistan. Now let's come to the point UN, they have a one peacekeeping mission in there, but unfortunately that mission is not quite successful in terms of their role in the Afghanistan, especially even also if we can take example that when Taliban take over the power. So this is really, we can say that in one way, maybe it's a successful role of UN, but on the other hand, it's a quite very clear, very clear that it's a failure of UN because they cannot go from the part or from the out of their humanitarian assistance. So now let's come to the second point, or second role of UN. That's what they are playing very effectively, we can say. Effectively means, as I said, like in terms of humanitarian assistance. This is Rohingya issues. We know the Rohingya refugee crisis is also one of the tragic issues, and even also UN itself, they also played a very important role in terms of like saying a very important statement in terms of like they say like the UN or Rohingya crisis as a textual ethnic cleansing, and also the there is a genocide happening. So this kind of statement is really important, especially for the people of Rohingya and also for the humanitarian perspectives of the world even. So now come to the point, when you look to these two issues, the one is Afghanistan and other is the problem and crisis in the Myanmar, like Rohingya issues, it's very clear the role of UN, they cannot go far and beyond their limitation, like only work for the humanitarian activities. And that's a big problem because, of course, like when we are trying to take a note from the analysis or from the experiment, especially from the field. It's very clear for UN, they cannot go and they cannot do something like, let's say, like to stop and to send a peacekeeping missions in there. Even there is a very interesting thing, of course, like when we talk the reform system, let's say in the case of Rohingya issues, when UN tried to make some kind of sanction or embargo on Myanmar government or even the Myanmar military, it was quite impossible because of like some kind of veto power countries, let's say like China and Russia, and their role and their power inside the UN system, that makes impossible UN to play their maybe much more effective role. So that's why, I mean, what the system UN make, it also make the UN, I mean, fall in a crisis. Even in a recent statement, like just a couple of days ago, when we see that the UN presidents and his some statements, especially to take example of the Shanghai cooperations and also the Russia and China's role and also their activity from the Asian perspective, or we can say that from the Eastern perspective, the UN try to see it like, okay, they are making another world. It means like they are making some kind of problem inside the UN. So of course, like when UN trying to say it, they are taking a one role. What this role? That role is like, okay, the UN trying to talk as international community, but actually on behalf of Western community. So that's another epistemological, or we can say the a theoretical problem of the UN, because when they are talking the international community, they talk just from one side of the world. But on the other hand, of course, there is a problem, especially when you talk about like the current crisis, like the Russia's attack or the issues with Ukraine, and the issues also the small or big, whatever it is, I mean, related to the pandemic and also the food insecurity. So those kind of things again say, okay, there is a problem also in Eastern society, or even also Russia or China oriented international order, or China and Russia oriented regional order. There are problems, but it's still the way UN think, it looks like it's a Euro and West centric international community. And that's why in future, I mean, our respected, even the professor Ariel from Argentina, and also the professor from Africa also said that the perspective from the Latin America and also Africa, that the gap of the UN role in there and the role of those countries from that region. But in here, I mean, in an Asian perspective, of course, in one way, I mean, as China is the better member countries, so we can say like, okay, some way Asia has a role inside the UN. But from the, I mean, broader perspective, let's say like that, if we take the different conflict, as I say, the Afghanistan crisis or conflict, or Kashmir conflict, or Rohingya problem, or the Patani Muslims or Korean is still the ongoing conflict with these two countries. Even also some islands problems with the Southeast Asian countries, with let's say the China's problem with Philippines or Malaysia, Singapore, or Indonesia, even also to Australia. So it shows that in future there are really huge security problems. And in that case, like when UN just count only one country like China, it means there are a gap in there. So for example, if we look like some countries, like how they want to see the reforms inside the UN Security Council. For example, like Turkey, from Asia, especially from the South Asia, India want to see themselves in a UN Security Council, I mean the permanent Security Council system. Like they want to say, oh, like, okay, the 5 members country is not enough. It's, I mean, like it's greater than 5. I mean, it should be more than 5 countries. So they are also trying to say from, I mean, especially from the Modi government, they are trying to emphasize those issues like, okay, it should be more than 5, and India should have a much more role. Of course, we know that the problem, when China got the position in a permanent Security Council, we see the different kinds of problem in the region. And also when India also got, if India got that position, maybe there will have another problem, like maybe Pakistan will not be happy with that decision, or maybe other countries, in terms of the security problem, they will not be happy. But yeah, I mean, as if we take a country's case study, they may have, or India have, some interest to put their role in the permanent member system. Other countries, for example, now we are talking about the reform. In a reform approaches, like in Asia, like let's take from Indonesia to Malaysia, and also like the other countries, especially when we are talking about some countries, let's say Indonesia. I mean, it's not something like we are talking, okay, Indonesia is economically or it's a very rich country. No, we are talking just even in terms of population, in terms of representative, in terms of responsibility. So these countries have some sort of like, characteristics, some sort of like capacity, capability, and even also willingness to take the position, whatever it is, in a security permanent system, or there may have other system to talk and to take that position. Let's come even also in terms of economic power. Let's just even say a small country, very small, like a Singapore. It can be also the another part in a UN reform system to put as an example to resolve many conflicts in the region. Even also Malaysia can be the good example to take that position to resolve the problems. I mean, in terms of the, to resolve the regional problem, because there is a very good thing we can say for UN. I mean, as I said from my first to last, and for UN, it is quite even difficult, I mean, to move apart from the humanitarian assistance. So for that region, they should, give us some kind of, or we can say more powers to some regional countries in the UN system. In that way, those countries play their, much more effective roles to resolve the problems in a regionally. So we can rather say like, okay, rather than international resolution, we should find out the regional resolution. So regional resolution can be done with the regional countries. They should see, they should make a dialogue, and they should find out the resolution. And UN should give this kind of power inside their system. So, however, I can just come up to the in a conclusion like that way. In UN, of course, they are doing work. We cannot ignore it, and we cannot say like the UN is failed. But still, we can say that what UN is doing is very limited, and the reform is real, and it should to be happen today or tomorrow. But this is the real, and this is the fact. I mean, from which perspective we will look, I mean, this is the reality that we cannot ignore. Nobody can ignore even also UN, as I said, the UN itself, they cannot even ignore the things. So thank you so much again, the Professor Ataman, and also SETA to make this important session in the right time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nazmul Islam. Now I want to give the floor to Dr. Yücel Acer, who has prepared a report on Turkey's perspectives on the UN reforms. Turkey, we all know that is one of the leading countries in the world that asking for the UN reform. One of the motto that was raised here in Turkey, firstly used by the Turkey's president, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the world is bigger than 5. It's a direct demand to reform the UN Security Council and give this platform, open this platform to the non-Western countries, especially. Now we want to hear from Yücel Hoca, the Turkish perspective. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Professor Ataman. As you highlighted, whenever we talk about the United Nations reforming proposals, inevitably we should talk about the Turkey's proposals because they are quite distinctive in many respects. Several years ago, President Erdogan said that the world is bigger than 5. It really attracted a lot of attention. So there is another reason to be pleased in this panel. because the United Nations General Assembly sessions are being held at the moment at a time that the international community is actually facing very serious problems. As we all know, there is a full-fledged war between Russia and Ukraine, and unfortunately, there is no clear sign that it's going to end very soon. And also, there are many, resulting serious problems for international community, like economic problems, energy shortage, and food shortage. And also, there is a possibility that this conflict may escalate between two countries, and maybe there might be some more conflicts between some other countries. Let's just hope that it would not happen. But anyway, when we talk about the global governance and dealing with these serious problems, of course, we should talk about the United Nations. That's why this panel is quite significant at the moment. And of course, we should talk about the UN reform. As we have witnessed several times, the United Nations has been failing on many serious issues so far. So that's why reforms are quite significant. In a sense, before talking about the Turkey's proposals, we have to a bit talk about the history of the UN reform proposals, because this analyze will put forward many distinctive points in order to reflect on the proposal made by Turkey in recent years. First of all, I have to say that reforming the United Nations has just started after its establishment. The Security Council had 11 members when it was first established, and in 1964, the membership is increased to 15 by adding 4 extra non-permanent members. And also, there were many demands from Soviet republics at the very beginning to make the United Nations more representative in terms of staff working in the United Nations. In later years, especially starting in 1990s, the reform effort gained more significance because the Cold War ended and there were a new world order, and unfortunately, in such an order, many international conflicts were start to be, witnessed, unfortunately. So that's why, especially after or in 1990s and afterward, we have seen many serious United Nations reform proposals. Almost all of them prepared by the Secretary Generals of the United Nations, as demanded by sometimes General Assembly. We have seen, as I say, many proposals like the Agenda for Peace in 1990s, which mostly focused on peacekeeping and some other related issues. After 1990s, we have seen some other, proposals, mostly focusing on to make the United Nations functioning more effectively in many respects, not only in peacekeeping, but also in preventing the poverty, preventing the climate change, environmental pollution, or global irregular migration. All these were quite significant issues of our time. So the proposals try to, make the United Nations more effective in dealing with these kind of serious problems. Of course, almost all the time, the reforming this Security Council has been a dominant issue because, as we all know, as far as preserving the peace in international community, it's the Security Council responsible or an authority responsible for preserving the peace in the international community. That's why reforming the Security Council always meant to achieve a more effective system in preserving the peace in international community. During all these discussions, we have witnessed a couple of major approaches. For example, the so-called G4 states. These states were hoping to be permanent members in the Security Council. Most of the time, they were Germany, Japan, and Brazil and India. They, of course, advocated to increase the permanent members of the Security Council, hoping that they would be the permanent members. Of course, there were some other proposals to increase the non-permanent members of the Security Council. However, on the other hand, some other countries, non-aligned countries, for example, they insisted on increasing the membership of the Security Council, not by a couple of states are joining, but some more states, especially the states from non-represented continents like Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So that's why non-aligned states always pressed on to increase the membership of the Security Council in order to make them more representative, or representing all the continents, all the regions of our globe. So there are some other initiatives. In one of them, Turkey was also among these countries. They were called Uniting for Consensus. They had a completely different approach. They were against increasing the permanent members of the Security Council, because permanent membership, according to these countries, permanent membership is not really just, it's not really the effective way of making the Security Council functioning effectively. It's not the way to increase the number of the permanent membership. It's rather making the Security Council more representative, increasing the non-permanent members as well. And there is another aspect of these proposals, especially Turkey was advocating this. Let's completely remove the veto power from the Security Council, because there is no point increasing the number of the states who have veto power. That's why, we have seen during all these discussions, we have seen many conflicting proposals only on, Security Council membership and voting system. Unfortunately, so far, although many discussions were made starting in 1990s, at least since 1990s, and for many decades, unfortunately, there was no change in the composition and voting system of the Security Council. Although the number of the member states of the United Nations went up to, at our time, 193 member states. It used to be quite less, and the Security Council was again almost in the same shape. And unfortunately, despite all these discussions, there is no movement, there is no achievement in this case. If we come to the point of Turkey's proposals and Turkey's approach, it has many significant aspects we have to talk about. First of all, I have to say that, as Professor Ataman pointed out, especially Turkey's approach, and especially in terms of president's approach, it really attracted too much attention, many attention from all over the world, because it was almost for the first time that, a leader was emphasizing the unjust and undemocratic nature of the Security Council. There were discussions behind the closed doors. No leader was, so open to say that Security Council is so undemocratic and so unrepresentative and ineffective. So that's why President Erdogan's statement was quite attracting attention from all over the world. And it was almost starting point for Turkey to get involved in these discussions. According to the official statements, it's quite a moral obligation on Turkey to get involved in these discussions. So moral responsibility is the point that has been always emphasized in Turkish official statements, especially by President. There are actually three major points, three major aspects of the approach that Turkey has taken on these issues. First of all, the principles that should be followed during reforming the United Nations. So Turkey, first of all, puts forward certain principles that should be followed when the United Nations is reformed. And secondly, there are also concrete proposals made by Turkey concerning reforming the United Nations. So not only emphasizing principles, Turkey has also put forward certain major principles as far as the United Nations reform is concerned. So three elements. First of all, Turkey obliges moral obligation to get involved in this discussion and still very much involved. It seems that Turkey will continue to be involved. If we look at the president's speech yesterday, he made in the in the General Assembly, he again emphasized that world is bigger than five, and United Nations is failing in many significant issues. So that something should be done to correct this. So it seems that Turkey is as much as involved as it was involved a couple of years ago, and it seems that it would be involved every time as far as the United Nations reforms is concerned. Concerning the principles, first of all, Turkey is not saying that a new international organization should be established. That's not the point. That's not the principle Turkey follows. Turkey rather says that, it should be the United Nations again, and not in this present shape, but it should be reformed to make it more democratic, more effective, more representative, especially more effective in preserving the international peace and security. So that's the point, that's the principle Turkey, first of all, puts forward. It's not about creating a completely new international order or international organization, but rather reforming the United Nations to make it a better international global organization. On the other hand, principles, Turkey says that there should not be many more issues we should concentrate on, but rather there should be a single issue chosen to be focused on during this reforming process, and it should be Security Council. There are many other principles like, making the United Nations organs interacting each other more effectively, and many other issues like creating criteria to be a member of the Security Council, which is achievable by all states. So there should be a equality of chances for every state to be a member of the Security Council. If we look at lastly the concrete proposals, Turkey says that General Assembly should be made as a real decision-making organ of the United Nations, rather than just, discussion platform making no binding decisions. Turkey advocates that General Assembly should be the decision-making authority in the United Nations, because it represents all the states around the world. And Security Council, it should be there should be no veto power in the Security Council, and the Security Council should be accountable to the General Assembly after reforming it. There are also Secretariat. Turkey emphasizes Secretariat should be more accountable to other other organs of the United Nations, especially the General Assembly. So the Secretariat should not be completely free to do something or not to do something about an ordinary or serious issue, but should be accountable. Real accountability should be emphasized. And the last point, Turkey says that Economic and Social Council, according to Turkey, is very significant, and it should be reformed to make it more effective, because it covers all the community issues in international community, like poverty, human rights, environment, and many other related issues should be covered by Economic and Social Council. That's another point that Turkey emphasizes. Unfortunately, because we have limited time, I think it should be enough at the moment to say all these things and for the time being. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Acer. It was a detailed analysis of Turkey's perspective regarding the UN reform. You know, we all know that, unfortunately, recently, increasingly, neither the pro-status quo power nor the emerging or challenging powers in the world defend the current structure of the United Nations. That is, neither the United States and its European allies are happy about some of the decisions made by the United Nations and its expert organizations such as UNESCO, etc. We shouldn't forget that just recently, the United States has withdrawn from some of the UN agencies and sub-institutions. That is, it's not happy at all about the UN decisions. On the other hand, the non-Western powers, they are not happy about the current structure of the United Nations. As our speakers have underlined earlier, you know, the United Nations unfortunately is unable to solve any problem, whether it's in the Caribbean, in the Latin American subcontinent, in the African continent, in South Asia, in the Middle East, etc. So the United Nations is not at that point to provide international peace and security, especially for the weaker states. The second significant problem which urges the necessity of the UN reform is the lack of inclusiveness and representation at the UN level. You know, we have to make the UN system to be more inclusive, to be more representative, not to focus on the Western powers' interest, but on the global interest. That is, for the protection of the planet. That is, global scale problems, both traditional and non-traditional threats directed to the humanity, to the all humankind, you know, such as the climate change, environmental security, human rights violations, etc. So it was quite interesting to hear different perspectives from different parts of the world. We all probably agree that the current UN system is not sustainable. That is, it must be changed in some way, but probably it is at the same time about the changing balance of power at the global scale. So we have been unfortunately witnessing an increasingly tense and conflictual atmosphere in Ukraine between the Russian Federation and the European countries led by the United States. So it will be quite interesting to see in which way this UN reform will evolve. But it is a necessity. It must not be postponed anymore in order to provide a global governance principle, the rule of law, respect for human dignity, for human rights at the global scale. So again, I thank you very much for four of our speakers. I don't know whether do we have any question directed to speakers? Ibrahim, do we have any question? Probably not.
We don't have any questions.
Okay, then if you want, let's again, according to the previous order, if you have your last remarks, let me give you 2-3 minutes just for the concluding remarks. Dr. Ariel Gonzalez Levaggi, do you have any additional remarks to make?
No, just a couple of final phrases. First, is quite relevant to tackle the United Nations security reform in a more horizontal way, also in a more democratic pattern. So in that regard, I think the participation of Latin America, the Caribbean, of Africa, of Asian nations is not only relevant, but also is vital for the future global governance.
Thank you very much. Dr. Elfaqih. We cannot hear. Can you turn on your mic, please?
Sorry, I just would like to reaffirm the importance of equality at the United Nations system, and I'm for the idea of giving more authority to the General Assembly rather than the Security Council and the veto problem, because the veto makes us all irrelevant. The one equals all. One country equals the whole world, which is not by any means or judgment a fair can constitute a fair share for the international community. And the word also, the word of international community should be freed from the domination or the dominance of the Western countries. Whenever they say the international community, it makes a direct reference or inference to the Western countries rather than the rest of the world. So there is no really inclusivity in the system or even in the wording that it is used in the international politics. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Nazmul Islam.
Thank you, Professor. I just want to add one more thing that could be like the point. What the problem of UN we already discussed from a very holistic approach. But the issue is here, I mean, like when UN established in 1945 and the situation and the aftermath, it was very clear. I mean, UN is not a liberal system. It's ultimately a realist system. So as a realist organization, whatever they say, the liberal or those kind of things, they should take the reality of the world. I mean, as we also know, even that the fact, I mean, from League of Nations to and United Nations, I mean, the transform, I mean, during that time, it was actually a vacuum of power or vacuum of leadership or vacuum of responsibility. Now we are not living in a similar time, but still there is some gap of the responsibility. There is some kind of power vacuum. There is some point of the leadership problem and the real leadership problem. Now come up to the point of the reform system. So UN should acknowledge these things like, okay, the some countries, whatever it is, Turkey or like some Asian countries, they have some kind of, I mean, they are taking their responsibility. They are taking their capacity or also the capability. So, and also from the Latin America, like Brazil, I mean, these countries has that capacity. I mean, like at least UN can think to put or to take them in their reform or in their, let's say, like the Security Council permanent membership system by acknowledging the problem of the current international order. So in that way, I think like the UN may resolve the problem, and also they can understand that ultimately this is not liberal, I mean, system. It's ultimately a realist system. So they should take the reality of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I want to give the floor lastly to Yücel Hocam.
Yeah, actually, I just forgot, I missed a significant point. During all these discussions and almost always and almost in all proposals, the 5 permanent member states of the Security Council were against extending the veto power to some other countries. Yes, they accepted the possibility of having new permanent members, but without a veto power of permanent members, new permanent members. And secondly, they were against any idea of abolishing the veto power completely. So they have always been, and still they are very pleased to be in such a very privileged status. Their justification is that, if we change the system in the Security Council, the decisions would be ineffective and unapplicable. That's actually like downgrading the rest of the international community. Imagine that a decision is taken by General Assembly as a binding state, and it would not be able to apply. So it's like downgrading the rest of the international community other than these 5 countries. It's not just, and it's not according to the circumstances of our time. But we have to know that these 5 states are still very keen on keeping their privileged status, and it is not really in line with our international community's positions at the moment.
Thank you very much, Yücel Hocam. Thank you all again. It was quite interesting to hear these remarks from all of you. Probably, there was a kind of common denominator, a common understanding focusing on the necessity of the UN reform. We know that the current international system is not exactly the one that was created in the wake of the Second World War. Whether it's the United Nations was crafted to represent the liberal world, as a matter of fact. But as Nazmul Islam has just mentioned, it was created from a realistic perspective to protect the interest of the victorious powers of the Second World War. But the Cold War has ended. The bilateral world structure was collapsed. The Soviet Union dismembered. So we have been living in a transitory period for the last 2-3 decades, and this forces the United Nations, one of the products of the Second World War, to change its structure or to be replaced by another global structure. We don't know how it will be created, but these are all challenges ahead of us. We hope that the humanity will not face a global, that is a total world war 3 in near future. Thank you very much again. So there are less indications to be optimistic, but this is at least our hope that some rational actors will proceed and try to create a sustainable and inclusive representative world platform. So thank you very much. See you on another SETA panel. Have a nice day. Thank you very much.